Uh, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As we all are aware that situation in Afghanistan has changed so dramatically, and every persons, whether in the region of Asia or around the world, is worried about this changing scenario in Afghanistan, and everyone has some questions for, especially for United States, which has a military presence for 20 years in Afghanistan, and even before that, from 1979 Soviet invasion, USA has played a major role in getting back Afghanistan from Soviet occupation. I have a very special guest today with me, Mr. Mark Paz. I hope I have correctly pronounced the name. He has served in Afghanistan as a contractor, and he knows the ground realities. Welcome, Mark, to the show, and thank you very much for giving us time.
Thank you, Arif.
Mark, my first question: what was the reason of sudden withdrawal of United States from Afghanistan? If their target was elimination of Osama bin Laden, then that was achieved 10 years back. So why stayed there for 10 more years?
To answer the first part of your question, I don't think the withdrawal was sudden, as the former president announced the intentions for the U.S. to withdraw in November of 2020. However, given the former president's history of erroneous statements and outlandish and unkept promises, that might have led to a credibility issue. Now, when President Biden came on board, he stated that he wanted all the U.S. out by September 11th, that being a special day of remembrance. And so the closing of the camps and the forward operating bases, they all went into effect starting February and March. What I think caught everyone off or by surprise is the rapidity, how fast they were able to break down and withdraw. That, I think, was the surprising element. To answer your second question, I think the U.S. stayed 10 years beyond the death of bin Laden to try and root out the Taliban and create a stable Afghan government. However, that is where the U.S. and the coalition forces failed, I think. They tried to solve and correct a systematic and cultural problem that has existed for years. And it takes generations. The Taliban is not a uniformed entity. They are woven deeply into the fabric of Afghan society. Most Afghans, in some way or another, have direct or indirect family ties to the Taliban. It's just a fact of life over there. And the percentage is higher in the rural provinces. Moreover, the U.S. had to deal with corruption as a regular way of doing business. Corruption is how they do business in Afghanistan. Corruption is on all levels, from the local shopkeeper to the province police chief and into, the mid and higher levels of politics. And that kind of thinking and action can't be unlearned and changed in 10 years. It takes generations, multiple generations of change for something like that to happen.
Mark, so do you think that this Taliban regime is not as dangerous as they did on 9/11 and global terrorism was? I mean, all the terrorists from Chechnya to Uzbekistan to Pakistan to Arabs gathered in Afghanistan during 96 2001 Taliban period. So do you think that this Taliban is not as dangerous as that Taliban?
No, I didn't say that at all. This Taliban is very dangerous. They are far-reaching across the world, and with internet, social media, online conversion in other countries is quite problematic. You don't need to build a terror cell anymore overseas, which is what they did decades ago. Nowadays, you can just find that one lone wolf who's, just a little off and believes whatever you tell him and convince him to act. I mean, that's how this is dangerous.
You served as a contractor. Before going further to the questions for my viewers to know what a contractor's role was in Afghanistan, because generally I'm from Pakistan, and what we in Pakistan are said that contractors are those who hire target killers and they do mayhem and this and that. What is a contractor in clear words, and what did you do during your period in Afghanistan?
So contractors come in all forms, all shapes and sizes. We get a lot of contractors from Uganda and Kenya, and they sign a contract to work as physical security. They guard the watchtowers, they guard the entrances and the exits. We get contractors from India and some from Pakistan, and they do a lot of the services stuff. They keep the buildings going. They work in the food service areas. They cook the food, they serve the food, they prepare the food, they clean up afterwards. We get contractors. So they come from all over. And we also get the high expensive contractors. You've got a helicopter or a fighter jet or an airplane out there. That requires a special skill, and so those contractors are hired on from companies that build those machines or have knowledge of those machines. They're the ones that, are the ones everybody's complaining about, spending all this money. It seems almost like God, for lack of a racket. But contractors come from all over. They hire so many international and foreign contractors as well as just U.S. contractors. However, it's usually the U.S. companies that do the bidding and get the awards, and then they're the ones that hire the contractors from other countries.
So when you were in Afghanistan, did you feel danger, or your lives were in danger, or threats from Taliban or some extremist groups?
Well, yes, but it's hard to honestly describe it because, when I was on a base or forward operating post, yes. Did we take rocket fire? Yes, we did. Sometimes they were firing rockets. Now, obviously, I knew that they weren't firing rockets, specifically at me, but they were firing rockets on the base that I was on, And there were also green on blue attacks. The green on blue is when a trusted member of the Afghan National Army or ANASOC or ANP, they turn and they attack a coalition force member. So, that was also a reality that you have to be worried and concerned about. So you have to sort of keep your defensive posture up at all times, and then there are the converts, the ones who build suicide bombs and strap them on and, try and make their way onto base. So, did I ever feel that my life was in imminent actual danger at any given time? No, but it kind of hung over, kind of like a cloud of discontent, so to speak. You just feel it, and you've always kind of got your little guard up, just being extra hyper aware.
During a case in Pakistan, there was a gentleman from USA, Raymond Davis. His case was very much famous because he killed two people in Lahore. And during that time, when he was presented in the court, we used to listen one word, Blackwater. Blackwater was also a contractor, or what was that?
So Blackwater was a contract company, independent, that started up to staff the executive protection needs in Afghanistan. So, and they were made up of folks with specialized backgrounds, be it military or law enforcement. And Blackwater sort of had a Wild West mentality of what was going on, that they could operate with impunity, not be held accountable. And, some of the things that they did, got the company, ended. It closed down the company, got a lot of folks fired. But then again, the company reformed and came out as another branch of that service, and that's the problem with the contracting world. Arif, it's not all as easy as hiring. Who's going to cook and clean for you. It's people create these contracts and these businesses, and then when they hire them, sometimes these guys get overzealous, you know.
Mark, USA is a global advocate of democracy. Why, when an armed group came and disposed of a democratically elected government in Afghanistan, USA did not utter a word? Rather, President Biden said that we will accept Taliban if they respect human rights. What kind of this double standard?
I'd say it's not a double standard as much as it is a realization. You know, as much as the rest of the world dislikes the Taliban, for the last 20 years, they've proven that they have staying power. They know how to survive. I think President Biden touched on the human rights as the cornerstone of the basic conflict. You know, if in 20 years, you know, Russia, the United States, all these cannot eradicate the Taliban, the least you can do is ask the Taliban to be humane. You know, it's a far shot, but you can ask them not to slaughter women and children, not to force women back into silent, subservient roles, not to deny women basic education, and not to engage in genocide of other tribes. You know, that's the only way that they can say they recognize them in terms of being under the microscope or the magnifying glass of the rest of the world.
So does it mean that any armed group in any country in the world takes over and disposes of democracy, America will accept it because they are armed and they are strong and they are violent?
You know, I think everyone has to be taken in its own right, you know, depending on what the situation is. I'd like to think that, you know, the U.S. pulled out because, you know, we're just tired. 20 years. We haven't gotten anywhere. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't get anything done. You know, at some point, you know, they just got tired of it, you know.
Mark, there is a report that says that USA investment of over 2 trillion US dollars in Afghanistan was mostly to American contractors in Afghanistan. Do you agree with that, that most of that money went to corruption and contractors and American corporate sector?
Well, I'm not sure about the amount, but it wouldn't surprise me. The technology of war has changed, and prolonged modern warfare cannot be waged without contractor support. You know, as I mentioned earlier, contractors, they pave the roads, build the walls and runways and buildings and maintain them. They provide security. You know, they work in the kitchen services, laundry industry, you know, everything that they can do to keep the base running and to keep the war going. Contracting companies do their best to squeeze every single dollar out of every contract. And it gets frustrating after a while when we see resources spent in one area, but resources lacking in another. I think the whole contracting, bidding, and awarding process needs a complete overhaul, you know, and corruption and kickback is one of them. You know, I mean, that's a given. You know, the government awards a contract to a certain company in a politician's home state, so that politician and their home state is making money, and they send people over and they're making money. And then to save even more money or make even more money, you, instead of hiring Americans, you go out and you hire somebody from Kenya or from a Slavic southeastern Eastern Bloc country, and you pay them less. You know, one of the things that absolutely boggled my mind is the fact that they tied pay to the gross national product of that country. So someone working in the kitchen from Ukraine serving food and someone working in the kitchen from Kenya doing the exact same job get paid different amounts, because the person from Kenya, you know, their gross national product in the world community standing is higher than the person from Kenya, you know, and it's just, I think that's a shame. I mean, they're doing the same work, they're taking the same risks, they're having the same hardships, being away from their family. And just because they're from a poor country, they get paid less money. Personally, I don't think that's right, you know. But like I said, the whole contracting process needs a good, strong overhaul.
Mark, as a student of the regional politics and spending my life's last 27 years in human rights sector, and I'm working as a human rights activist in United Nations and European Parliament. So I have a small study. So I have read a report that says that there are reserves of precious minerals in Afghanistan of more than $1 trillion, and they said that the future is green energy resources like lithium batteries for or electric car and uranium and copper and all these. There are tons of reserves in Afghanistan. So my question regarding this is, number one, why US did not exploit those reserves during last 20 years when they were in Afghanistan? Number two, China and Russia are greedy for these minerals and they are rushing to accept Taliban. So it looks that their eyes are on those reserves. And number three, will US deal with Taliban for exploitation of these reserves?
Afghanistan holds a wealth of natural resources, not just metals and stones. I mean, there are jewels here, diamonds, rubies, emeralds are found in the mountains. And many Afghans try to mine them, but they don't have the industry, the equipment, all the infrastructure to do it. So I mean, it's difficult if you're out there with a screwdriver and a hammer trying to break a rock open and hope you find a jewel. It's not going to make any money for you. Because the Taliban has money, they operate some of the mines in the mountains, and obviously the folks working there are locals who are forced labor, or they get paid menial wages, and the Taliban takes the wealth. The U.S., like many other superpower nations, is very aware about exploiting the wealth of other nations. You have to remember now, the U.S. has a history of exploiting other countries. 160 years ago, the U.S. engaged in slave trade. We followed that by stealing and exploiting the lands of the Native American tribes as we expanded across the USA in a greedy fashion. And now the USA is paying somewhat of a moral price for that. They realize that. They realize that their greed during those eras was not at all what we want the American ideal to be. So with that kind of history, thankfully the U.S. has learned not to take its armies into other nations and then exploit the people and the resources. That's what we're trying to get away from, the image of what the U.S. has done. The old joke used to be, why did the U.S. go to the moon first? And that was, to exploit the riches and the minerals up there, And it's not just China and Russia who are interested in Afghanistan's resources. Iran and Pakistan are too. Afghanistan has got those wonderful Hindu Kush mountains which have snow on them all year round. And those snows, they're melting, they're causing rivers and streams, and they're flowing into Pakistan and India, and to Pakistan and Iran. And for decades, those countries were just taking all the water and doing with it what they wanted. And finally, the Afghan government said, we're going to dam this up and we're going to charge them. If they're going to take water that comes from Afghanistan, we're going to build a dam and charge them. Well, Iran didn't like that, neither did Pakistan. And so a couple of these facilities were actually attacked by none other than the Taliban, who were obviously paid by Iran and Pakistan. So, they're having to deal with that too. And China and Pakistan see Iran not only for its natural resources, but its market resources. Now that Afghanistan literally has nothing left, they are forced to buy all the cheap goods from Pakistan and China. That's it. They're two bordering countries can just flood Afghanistan with all the cheap goods that they've got. And same with Russia. Russia, for geographic and political reasons, is still and always has been interested in Pakistan, in Afghanistan.
Mark, Pakistan is the creator and supporter of Taliban. Do you think that the partner and ally of United States of America, Pakistan has played a role against the interests of United States and never allowed USA to settle things in Afghanistan by blackmailing them of Taliban threat?
Well, I doubt anyone could deny that Pakistan has played a role against the U.S. interests. Pakistan hid bin Laden and lied about it. The Taliban has camps and they actually train in the federally administrated tribal areas along the Afghanistan border. We have satellite imagery that shows that there's a mule train that goes from, those tribal lands straight across into that one little finger of Afghanistan that reaches out. You know, I'm quite sure the U.S. is well aware Pakistan's duplicitous and underhanded dealings, but the U.S. also recognizes that Pakistan is a nation that's armed with nuclear weapons. I mean, Pakistan has nuclear power. And it's probably in the best interest to keep Pakistan as an ally. You don't want to anger Pakistan. You don't want them to turn against you or side with, somebody who's opposed to the United States. So the best way I think that the U.S. is trying to deal with Pakistan is to keep them close and keep an eye on them. The U.S. cannot afford to let Pakistan ally itself with other nations that are hostile to the U.S.
So don't you think that Pakistan, if in a simple words we try to understand, is a girlfriend of United States but is having extramarital affairs with China and other parts also, because after all there are not so close relationship between China and America.
Yes, because Pakistan is an opportunistic country. They go wherever they can or wherever they see that they can get support. And if Pakistan has no scruples, they're open about committing, breaking the law and doing wrong things. But that's Pakistan.
Mark, when USA forces came to Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden, they came in two helicopters. One of those helicopters got damaged, so on return, before going back, US forces destroyed that helicopter so that helicopter full of technologies does not go into Pakistan Army's hands. Now, leaving Afghanistan, as you said that it was previewed since November last year, so almost left after 1 year. How come they left so lethal, sophisticated arms, tons of them in Afghanistan without destroying them or taking it with them back? How come they left these two for Taliban? Was it a gift?
So the U.S. government has determined through the Office of Management and Budget that picking up all these used vehicles, MRAPs, Humvees, that sort of thing, big trucks and that sort of thing, fuel trucks and that sort of thing, would cost more money to fly it home than it would to destroy it. So I actually saw on Bagram during my final weeks there, people with plasma torches cutting up $1 million pieces of military equipment, just cutting them up and turning them into scrap junk. Even things like air conditioners, heaters, ovens from the kitchen, anything that could be that could be used as a weapon was to be destroyed. Now, sadly, most of us who saw the equipment that was going to be left to the Afghan National Security Forces knew that eventually it would end up in the hands of the Taliban. But it was left with the understanding that the equipment would be used to combat the Taliban. The U.S. could not leave Afghanistan and take everything with them and return it back to how it was before the war started and expect the Afghans to put up any kind of a fight. So we had to arm them. We had to give them arms, munitions, and basic vehicles. It was something a lot of us saw coming, but we also understood the reasoning behind it. We just couldn't leave the Afghan soldiers, the ANA, empty-handed. We had to leave them something, even though we knew that it would eventually get taken over by the Taliban.
Mark, since 1979 till 2021, Russia, America, Pakistan, all of them played role in Afghanistan, but most of those were military role, violent roles, and destructive roles. India, on the other hand, as you have worked on ground, so you have seen it, has only done constructive role, positive role like rebuilding of society, civil society, infrastructure, dams, roads, training of civil service, police. So, how do you see, as you have witnessed things on ground, how do you see the role of India in rebuilding of Afghanistan?
Well, India represents one of the strongest and most stable nations in that region. The Indian folks, the Indian citizens they're educated. They make the finest doctors and engineers that the world has seen across the globe. Whereas Pakistan is content to exploit other nations with cheap goods or steal their natural resources, India has become a major trade partner in the world. And I'd like to think that India could stand as a role model for what Afghanistan could become. If they were able to get rid of the tribalism and the tribal infighting and the constant war. Like I said, the Afghan people that I've met were the hardest working, kindest people, but they've been misled for generations. They've been taken advantage of for generations. They're lost. And this is not something that any country, Russia, USA, China, can go in and fix in 10 or 20 years. It's going to take generation after generation after generation. And I think, when Afghanistan sees how India helped them in their times of need, that they could see that they could become, with the right changes, somewhat like India. But with the Taliban in power now, I just don't see that happening.
Pakistan has been exporting terrorism in India, especially in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is now a union territory in India. Jihadi outfits like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, these are branded as terrorist organization by United States also. But they are operating with impunity in Pakistan, and they are waging a war in Afghanistan, in India, especially in Kashmir. Do you see a danger that Pakistan-backed Taliban, after getting strong in Afghanistan, they will support Pakistan's jihadi activities in India?
Yes, I do. The Taliban has and continues to support terror all through India. And Pakistan knows that Kashmir region is an important region. It's the key to getting into Pakistan. It is. And Pakistan has made no secret of using the Taliban to do their bidding in whatever way. Now, the Taliban knows that it cannot change India or make India do what it wants it to do. All the Taliban can do is what they usually do, which is strike terror and attack and hope that builds distrust and instability. I mean, that's the whole theory and operation behind terror. If you hit enough terror, then people are going to start becoming distrustful. The country will become distable. No one believes in each other and that sort of thing. And that's what terror does. So, yeah, I think that the Taliban will be used in not just Kashmir, but wherever. Not just India, but around the globe. Sure.
So do you think Taliban will be under Pakistan dictation? because Pakistan has betrayed them in 2001 when George W. Bush attacked Afghanistan. Pakistan handed over Taliban representatives and commanders to USA, and they spent many years in Guantanamo Bay. So they are in one way angry with Pakistan army also. So do you think that they will be under the dictation of Pakistan army? Because Taliban commander recently said that we will not allow Afghanistan to be used for terrorism in other countries.
Well, that's Pakistan. When they say Pakistan says they won't allow Afghanistan to be used for terror in other countries, you have to remember that's the same Pakistan that hid Osama bin Laden, and lied about it. I think that when Pakistan, with George Bush, that was 20 years ago, okay? There's the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if Pakistan is still interested in the Kashmir region and making attacks on India, I think they will turn and ask the Taliban for help. Because in the world of international politics, if something were to happen, Pakistan will do what it always does, to say that wasn't us. That was the Taliban. We had nothing to do with it, when everybody knows that Pakistan was behind so much. So yes, I think that's a possibility.
Pakistan is a recognized terrorist exporting, sponsoring state. There is a growing conclusion among world powers. They don't say it clearly, but they know that Pakistan sponsors terrorism. Then why US is doing nothing to dismantle Pakistan? Though Pakistan's economy is in shatters and they are declining economy, they are very much in problems, and each time IMF and World Bank comes with more funding to Pakistan and gives Pakistan a stand. How long this will happen, and Pakistan will keep blackmailing international authorities with its nuclear power and with its terror sponsoring activities?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. is caught between trusting and distrusting Pakistan, with a reason, nuclear armaments. I can only hope that the U.S., the IMF, the World Bank see Pakistan as a nation that can be rehabilitated or improved. If all of them were to turn away from Pakistan and remove all aid, then Pakistan would have little motivation to try and improve itself on a worldwide scale. Furthermore, Pakistan would only delve deeper into the world of terror, corruption, and blackmail. When a country has no money and they can't keep stealing it from generous countries and lying to them, it's not much of a stretch of the imagination to see Pakistan fully going to China or fully going to Russia. That's how these puppet countries are built. They can't support themselves, so other countries play them like a puppet. And the U.S. and probably all these other nations see that. But their fear is if Pakistan falls, it'll go bad completely, and then that's going to just make that whole area so much worse to deal with.
Mark, Panjshir Valley, Ahmad Massoud and Afghan Vice President who claims to be president now, according to Constitution of Afghanistan, because President Ghani has left country. So he claims that he is now legal president. Ahmad Massoud, they have wedged a resistance group in Northern Alliance in Panjshir Valley. Do you think war is over in Afghanistan?
No. I think U.S. coalition forces war is over in Afghanistan, but there will always be tribal wars. You've got the Hazaras, the Pashtus. You got all these different tribes, and probably even worse is, even though the military has fallen, you still got generals who are going to become warlords. And their armies, are going to become strong arms, and it's just going to create that civil war chaos again, as everybody fights for control of Afghanistan, because they all want to control, the natural resources, the labor, all of that, and make it, like you said, a training area for terror, and that's very sad. I mean, Afghanistan deserves far better than that, and the coalition forces and the U.S. really did a great disservice. They really did.
Ahmed Masood has written in a Washington Post last week that we need support from United States to fight against Taliban, financial support, military support. Do you think USA will give any support to any group against Taliban?
Maybe, but not immediately. American politics is so challenging. I guess that's the friendly way to say it, that there's going to be years of finger pointing going back and forth between politicians and political parties and leaders, and people are just people are going to suffer for it. I mean, yes, I do believe Afghanistan needs support, but it's a hotbed. I mean, the last nation to go in and to Afghanistan, conquer it, and subdue it was Alexander the Great, right? I mean, right? If Russia and the U.S. cannot do anything with that country, it's a black hole, and the people suffer for that. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if there is a solution. I don't. But it's not going to be solved anytime quickly. I don't foresee the U.S. going in as a strong, semi-permanent element. They may go in launching airstrikes from military bases in Kuwait and Qatar and that sort of thing into remote regions. But in terms of soldiers, boots on the ground, occupying land, setting up bases again, it's going to be a long time before that happens, if it ever happens.
Last question, Mark.
Sure.
When some countries are occupied and liberating forces go there, the people, when they are liberated, they rejoice it and they welcome the liberators. But here in Afghanistan, when Taliban came, nobody welcomed them. We saw at Kabul airport how people were trying to escape from Afghanistan. Everybody is frightened. 40 million Afghan people are frightened, and majority of them do not like Taliban. Don't you think that we have betrayed Afghan people and we have thrown them in front of wolves?
Yes, I believe we have betrayed and let down the Afghan people. There's so much blame to go around. Part of the blame is the Afghan people did not fully embrace the changes we tried to make. They were very distrustful and not sure of a lot of the freedoms that we gave them. We tried to give them education, we tried to give them democracy, we tried to give them medical help. We tried to allow more freedoms for people, and a lot of that was taken by, say, the folks in the city areas and the larger city. But if you go out to the provinces, that wasn't welcome as much as one would think. At the same time, I think the U.S. misjudged the staying power of the Taliban and how deeply rooted they are in Afghanistan. Like I said earlier, they're woven in the very fabric of that country. Everybody is somehow tied to the Taliban, in one way or another, And the hardest thing, I think, everybody wonders, why did the Afghan army surrender so quickly? They fought hard, but they realized it was a losing battle. First of all, they weren't getting paid. Not hardly any of those soldiers are getting paid. Why? Because it's just corruption is the way of life. Nobody's collecting taxes. The U.S. is no longer giving money. Everybody up the scale is taking all the money and the corruption, and the soldiers aren't getting paid. They're risking their lives. So that yeah, sure, they're fighting for their freedom, but at the same time, they see it's a losing cause. So, some blame is due there on the part of the Afghans. Blame is also due on the part of coalition forces. It's hard to be a welcoming entity when you're locked inside of a base or camp, which is understandable because anything outside there, is considered a danger. Some of the villagers, I would talk to Afghan soldiers and Afghan police officers, and this one fellow I talked to, I interviewed him. He said that his father, who was a policeman, was killed by the Taliban. His brother, who was a policeman, was killed by the Taliban. All his livestock on his farm was killed. His house was burned down. And I said, and he said, all the other police officers in his station all abandoned their post and went over to the Taliban. And I said, why? And he said, because they're getting paid. He says, I haven't been paid in months. I said, well, how are you living? He says, he goes down to the market and he takes out personal loans from the shopkeepers, so it would be, imagine if you had to go down to the market and borrow from the supermarket guy. And I said, well, how much are you in debt? He said, about 3,000 US dollars, which is unpayable to a guy from Afghanistan. He's not going to be able to pay that back. He's just not, But that's what they're fighting over there, And yet we expect to give him a rifle and tell him defend this plot of land. And he would do it because his father and his brother were killed by Afghans, by the Taliban. But the average Afghan soldier, he's going to think 2, 3, 4 times about that.
Yeah, Mark, very sad situation. Free world is very much worried. But what can we do? Thank you very much, Mark, for enlightening us with your experience there in Afghanistan and with your views. It was pleasure talking to you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arif. All right.